Hello, beautiful people. What if you used 100% of your brain? Today, we'll be talking about the dumbest fucking strategy I've ever managed to make work. I know many people have come up with the idea of using Thundering Fury Bennett in the past, but I haven't actually come across anyone claiming it was a good build before. I'm here to change that. While the premise of the Thundering Fury set is quite limiting to begin with, in the right situation, this build is actually amazing. The basic idea is that you'll be using a mix of Hydro and Electro supports to electrocharge your enemies, then you'll be triggering both Vaporize and Overloaded reactions with the same hit from every single one of Bennett's elemental skills. You'll gain the damage multiplier from the Vaporize reaction, and the cooldown reduction from triggering an Overloaded reaction with the Thundering Fury set, and you'll effectively be reducing the cooldown of your elemental skill from 2 seconds to 1 second. While this is definitely a viable way to get a lot of damage out of Bennett by himself, the reason why it's strong isn't exclusively the damage you gain. Without the Thundering Fury set, Bennett is already the best consistent battery, that is to say, the best generator of elemental particles, while he's on the field. With Thundering Fury, which we'll be calling TF from here on out, basically, you get double what is already the best particle generation in the game. This means you can afford running Bennett's supports with much less energy recharge, and you can focus their builds on damage a lot more. On top of that, all three of the Electro units that compete for a spot in TF Bennett teams, which are Beidou, Fischl, and Lisa, have a Snapshot in their kit. A Snapshot is an ability that looks at the stats of its caster on cast and not in real time, which means if you cast them inside of Bennett's burst, they'll benefit from the attack bonus for the whole duration. Now that I've explained the basic premise of the team, I'll be going into details on unit choices, builds on those units, and team DPS comparison against other strong teams with footage to go along with it. Let's get into it. First off, let's get this out of the way. This team needs Xingqiu. Obviously, the opportunity cost of using a team with both Bennett and Xingqiu is really high, as your other team will perform much worse by not having access to those units. It is possible to make it work without Xingqiu by using a triple Electro core and giving up on the Vaporize part of Bennett's damage, but I generally wouldn't recommend it unless your other team absolutely needs Xingqiu. On top of that, at the moment, there's a bug that makes you deal more damage on your Vaporize when the same hit triggers both Vaporize and Overloaded, as the game only sees it as one reaction, and the 40% damage bonus to Overloaded from the Thundering Fury set is also applied to the Vaporize. I will be editing the video's description as well as pinning a comment when the bug gets patched, so that you are aware of it. It is, however, important to note that even though the team is definitely stronger with Xingqiu, Bennett isn't the biggest part of this team's damage. Enabling your supports to deal a lot of damage with little energy recharge requirements is his main job, and Xingqiu is mainly good because he doesn't need much energy recharge, therefore he can take advantage of the strengths that Bennett provides to the team. The other two units are generally chosen between Fischl, Lisa, and Beidou, depending on what you're up against. When you're up against exactly one enemy, Fischl's high single target damage makes her amazing. Even though my Fischl is more invested than both my Beidou and my Lisa, my fastest clear times on the current floor 12 have been with Beidou and Lisa, because a high constellation Beidou is so potent against exactly two targets that increasing her damage through Thrilling Tales and the defense reduction that Lisa provides ends up actually killing enemies faster than what Fischl's damage actually adds to the team. Similarly, my fastest clears of the Primo Geovish app have been with Fischl and Lisa, because when you don't get Beidou's burst to bounce between targets, she isn't nearly as strong. All this to say, all three of the Electro units you can use are actually strong, and you should not discount Lisa just because there aren't many comps that make her work, or just because she doesn't bring that much straight damage from herself to the team, because she does increase the team's damage very significantly. On top of that, believe it or not, but when you only have Beidou and Fischl, you'll sometimes run into issues where you're not applying Electro fast enough for Bennett to be able to overload with every E, and sometimes you'll get 2 Bennett E's in a row without actually getting an Electro application in between, meaning you won't be able to benefit from the Thundering Fury set. Lisa's Electro application is significantly faster than both Beidou and Fischl, meaning that if you're using a Lisa on your team, you should not be running into any problems relating to that. If for some reason you don't have Beidou, Fischl, or Xingqiu, or don't want to use Lisa, or or you're just already using them in your other team, here are the units you can use as replacements, although do keep in mind that only having one Electro unit, you might not apply Electro fast enough for Bennett to overload on every E, and therefore you will cripple your DPS. Sucrose can hold Thrilling Tales and increase your Electro and Hydro damage through the Viridescent Venerer set, but you generally won't be able to swirl Pyro, as the damage you gain from swirling Pyro isn't actually worth the time it takes to set up a Pyro aura on enemies and then swirl it. Albedo can provide decent off-field damage, but he can also weaken the Electro aura and make you lose some overloads and vaporizes. Venti can hold the Viridescent Venerer set, but if you're against enemies that can be sucked in by Venti, you probably shouldn't be using Thundering Fury Bennett at all, since it's so much weaker against non-heavies. Barbara can apply a Hydro Aura and hold Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayer, but she won't be providing any damage herself. Other units are strict downgrades and I would not recommend using anyone else. Let's now take a look at the build. The only non-flexible, non-negotiable part of TF Bennett comps is, well, running Bennett on the Thundering Fury set. Apart from that, builds are generally quite flexible, and just running your best available piece rather than focusing on set bonuses will actually generally yield better results. I'll still be looking at the best sets, but just keep in mind that it only takes a few better substats on a suboptimal set for it to be better than the optimal set. Bennett needs a Thundering Fury set, and wants Elemental Mastery, Pyro Damage, and Crit Rate or Crit Damage aiming for a 1-to-2 crit ratio on his main stats. His best weapon for solo DPS is the Primordial Jade Cutter, but the Aquila Favonia's higher base attack actually generally pushes your total team DPS over the edge because it buffs your supports more. For the same reason, I generally recommend the Alley Flash as a 4-star option, although the Blackcliff Longsword is a close second. But the Lion's Roar and the Iron Sting generally offer similar, if not higher, solo DPS. Bennett needs no Constellation, and while he gains a power spike at Constellation 1, Constellation 3, and Constellation 5, I feel good recommending the comp even to those who don't actually have any constellations. Your talent priority will be Burst, then Skill, and you can mostly ignore your normal attacks. Xingqiu wants 2-piece Hydro, 2-piece Noblesse, with attack percent, Hydro damage bonus, and crit rate or crit damage, again aiming for a 1-to-2 ratio. I would consider using Xingqiu on 4-piece Noblesse if you are not using Lisa, as you'll generally be using his burst before your other units, making it easy to snapshot his buff. His best weapon is the Primordial Jade Cutter, with a high refinement Lion's Roar not too far behind. Sacrificial Sword is not necessary in this comp due to the amount of energy generated by Bennett, but it is by no means a bad weapon, as it does add a layer of comfort in case you mess up your rotations, since you'll have enough energy no matter what. The Festering Desire should be the best free-to-play alternative, but Blackcliff Longsword and the Black Sword should generally be stronger if you have them. Xingqiu scales amazingly with Constellations, and the single target damage of your comp will be significantly stronger with a high Constellation Xingqiu. However, just like Bennett, I deem his Constellations to be mostly luxury, since his damage at C0 is already good enough to make this comp strong, and most importantly, he generally doesn't represent a huge portion of the team's damage. Your talent priority should be Burst, then Skill, and you can completely ignore normal attacks. Beidou wants a 2-piece Thundering Fury, 2-piece Noblesse, with attack percent, electro damage bonus, and crit rate or crit damage, again aiming for a 1-to-2 ratio. When against 2 enemies, she will represent by far the biggest part of your damage, so she should have your best artifacts. For this reason, you can mix and match with the aforementioned set, Gladiator's Finale, or just amazing offset pieces. When you switch into Beidou, always make sure to wait until Bennett's buff applies to her before using her burst, as losing the attack bonus on it is a huge loss of damage. I usually do this by using my parry before using my burst. Her best weapon is the Serpent Spine, but you have to use her on your number 1 slot in order to stack it up before the floor. If you don't want to have to wait 20 seconds before each floor, or if you can't get used to having a support on your number 1 slot, the Wolf's Gravestone will give similar damage output. The Unforged, Skyward Pride, and Blackcliff Slasher can all be good, but they have caveats that prevent them from being as strong as Wolf's Gravestone or Serpent Spine. Your best free-to-play weapon should be a prototype Archaic. Your talent priority should be Burst, then Skill, and you can completely ignore normal attacks. Lisa wants a 4-piece Noblesse Oblige with attack percent or energy recharge, electro damage bonus, and crit rate or crit damage, aiming for a 1-to-2 ratio. The reason why you can actually run energy recharge on Lisa isn't because she particularly needs it, it's just because her solo damage is so small that having the extra comfort can actually be better than just running attack percent. That being said, she still does a little bit of damage, so running damage pieces is better than not. Your talent priority should be burst only, as using your skill in this comp is generally a huge loss of DPS because of its cast time. Fischl wants a 2-piece Thundering Fury 2-piece Gladiators Finale with attack percent, electro damage bonus, and crit rate or crit damage, again aiming for a 1-to-2 ratio. When against exactly one enemy, she will be very strong, but she won't represent as big a portion of the damage as Beidou does against 2 enemies, because Xingqiu is also very strong against one enemy. However, since this comp uses a mix of Lisa and either Fischl or Beidou most often, you'll generally be able to swap around Fischl's artifacts with Beidou, since you will rarely be using both of them at once, meaning getting strong artifacts for her should be something you do almost by accident. Her best weapon is Skyward Heart, but multiple 4-star weapons are also quite strong. The Viridescent Hunt, Stringless, and Wind Bloom's Ode all have decent damage output, and they can all be considered if you don't have a harp available. Your talent priority should be skill only, as Fischl's burst does very little damage, but it doesn't hurt to level it up either. If you are using a Sucrose, she will want a 4-piece Viridescent Venerer with either Elemental Mastery ×3 or attack percent, animal damage bonus, crit rate or crit damage, aiming for a 1-to-2 ratio. The Elemental Mastery ×3 isn't as important as it is in other comps because you will rarely be swirling Pyro, which is the element that triggers Vaporizes. She'll want a Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers, and your talent priority doesn't really matter much as her damage should be minimal. Albedo wants 2-piece Archaic Petra, and either 2-piece Defender's Will or offset pieces with great substats, with defense percent, geo damage bonus, and defense percent, although a crit rate or crit damage circlet wouldn't be significantly worse. So if that's what you have, you can go for that as well. His best weapon will be Harbinger of Dawn, and you should only swap into him once every 30 seconds to get his skill on the field. Your talent priority should be skill only. Venti wants 4-piece Viridescent Venerer with attack percent, animal damage bonus, and crit rate or crit damage, with the same weapon recommendations as Fischl. Your talent priority should be burst and then skill. Barbara wants either 4-piece Instructor or 4-piece Noblesse with HP healing bonus, and a Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayer. Only upgrade her talents if you somehow find yourself dying. Now that we know how to build each unit, let's look at what sets the team apart from other teams. First off, it's really hard to die, as the best version of the team uses Bennett, Xingqiu, and Beidou. Having Beidou and Xingqiu's damage reduction inside of Bennett's inspiration field, on top of Xingqiu's healing when you take damage, basically makes you fucking immortal. And you have to mess up really badly to somehow still manage to die. The team also has amazing damage, both against 1 or 2 heavy enemies. While it struggles against more than 2 enemies, it is very rare to have more than 2 heavy enemies, and this comp should only really be played against heavy enemies to begin with. Finally, although this is definitely subjective, it's an insanely fun to play comp, as you feel like a god shredding Ruin Guard's HP down faster than you can realize. There's also no real downtime period, and you always actually have something to do because your energy generation is so potent. Now you might be asking yourself, well, how good is the damage? In order to show just how potent the damage is, I'll be comparing it to Melt Ganyu, which is widely considered to be power creep. Now, here's a list of the assumptions that I will use when it comes to the comparison. 1. All characters are level 80 out of 80. 2. All enemies are level 100. 3. They're fighting the current floor 12-3, which is 2 Ruin Guards. 4. All characters have the best available 4-star weapon, and if it is a blacksmith weapon, it will be refinement 3. 5. All talent levels are level 8, or 11 if the +3 talent level constellation has been unlocked. 6. All characters have a total of 25 good substats distributed optimally. Characters that need energy recharge will therefore lose out on offensive stats since they will need more energy recharge. 7. Rotations are considered to be perfectly executed. And 8. Rotations start and end when all cooldowns line up. which means that Bennett's burst is delayed by 5 seconds, since Beidou's burst cooldown is 5 seconds longer. The reason for this last assumption is to be able to look at sustained, consistent DPS and not just at a quick burst of damage. First off, let's take a look at the AoE comparison. For the AoE team comparison, I am using Bennett, Beidou, Lisa, and Xingqiu. Thundering Fury's Bennett's best scenario is when he's used to funnel as many energy particles as possible into a Beidou against exactly 2 targets. Since we're not forced to run Fischl as we usually are when it comes to Beidou comps because of her high energy requirements, we can replace her with Lisa, which supports Beidou by giving her a Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers buff and by reducing the enemy's defense. On top of that, we also have some pretty decent damage coming out of Bennett and Xingqiu. While the comp is still shy of tickling Ganyu's total DPS at low constellation, with Beidou's Constellation 2, this changes, and when you have high constellations on all of your 4-star units, this comp is actually quite a bit stronger against the current floor 12-3 than Melt Ganyu is. Now do keep in mind, this is Thundering Fury Bennett's best case scenario. So these graphs don't show that Thundering Fury Bennett is always stronger than Melt Ganyu. All they do is show that it is definitely, when in its niche, a very, very solid comp. Now let's take a look at the single target damage chart. As you can see, a low constellation team of TF Bennett has relatively low total DPS, and the damage is split between multiple units, meaning that you need to actually invest into multiple units. However, when we get to higher constellation on the 4-star characters, we start to see a noticeable increase, especially in Xingqiu's performance, as his constellations are insanely big for his damage. Unfortunately, this team never really catches up to Melt Ganyu. Now, do keep in mind, Melt Ganyu is widely considered to be one of, if not the strongest comp in the game, and so this doesn't show that the comp is bad against a single target. However, it might actually surprise you that with proper investment into all of your units, the single target DPS of a high constellation TF Bennett comp is only about 2% behind that of a low constellation Ganyu Melt comp. However, that isn't to say the comp is nearly as strong for most players, as again, Ganyu Melt only requires 1 unit to be invested and works against every enemy, while TF Bennett requires 3 units to be invested. Now again, I want to stress that the reason I showed these DPS comparison is not to claim that TF Bennett is stronger than Ganyu Melt. Obviously, it only works against heavy enemies, it's only really insane against 2 enemies, and the current floor 12, which will probably rotate relatively soon, is the perfect case scenario for it. Still, it is important to note that this is a 4-star only comp, and it does catch up in the right scenario to the other meta-defining comps. This also supports something I've been saying for a long time, which is that Genshin's balance team is actually surprisingly good at their job, and what people consider power creep is generally just them not understanding the nuance, weaknesses, strengths, and caveats of certain units. I'll finish the video with a showcase of both the comp's strength against heavy enemies and its weakness against non-heavy enemies. The takeaway I hope you'll get from this video is that there are often niche, situational comps that will just be the strongest in those scenarios. Whenever people talk about unit strengths, there are many variables, assumptions, and such that can make units go from basically useless in most scenarios like Lisa to an integral part of one of the strongest comps in the game.
Black spires in the city sky, they shimmer and shine tonight. Act-wise and electric eyes and a million flashing lights. And I can wish myself away, change the parts that bleed decay. wreck dreams of organic toys that are running out on the edge. Soft screams of the rocker boys are echoing through my head. Clowns and demons mechanized. Biotech behind our eyes. Not just another riding solo in the car. Electric embers will ignite. Not just another lonely nomad on the road. I'm a ghost in the city, I'm a ghost in the city of night. Media manipulation, silicon circle smile, network navigation, reach and file. Not just another riding solo in the cold. Electric embers will ignite. Not just another lonely nomad on the road. I'm a ghost in the city, I'm a ghost in the city of night. I'm running out on the edge, running out on the edge. I'm a ghost in the city of night. Yeah, I'm running out on the edge, running out on the edge. I'm a ghost in the city of
And that about does it. One last thing I want to mention before the video ends is that all of my team DPS comparisons that I've done were not including the super vape bug, which is the one that increases damage when you trigger overloaded and vaporize at the same time. This means that currently, before the bug is patched, this comp is even stronger than my graphs show. I've been playing this comp for a little bit over a month now, and I wasn't planning on making this video, but I honestly couldn't find a single video that took a serious look at the comp, and so I figured I should just do it. If neat theory crafting ideas are the kind of thing you want to see, feel free to subscribe, and if you want to see the 1,000 bad ideas that never make it into videos, feel free to drop by my Twitch channel where I stream every day for an unhealthy amount of time. I'll be leaving a link in the description to my in-depth Bennett text guide, the elemental particle generation sheet, as well as the Xingqiu's Discord server and website. Please leave a comment telling me how your day was, and as always, farewell, beautiful people.